Well, good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to another of our Webinar Wednesday series, number 21 in managing your business throughout the pandemic. Well, good afternoon. My name is Kelly Bearden. I'm your host today, and I'm the director of the CSU Bakersfield SBDC. And working at home still. It's great. Got a chainsaw, a stump grinder going across the street, all kinds of noise, and you can't hear any of it. So kind of a fascinating app I found, but that's another story. So it's kind of nice to be able to do this and work in this environment with so much racket going on around you. So we're here for the 21st week now, and a really big shout out and thanks to Keith Bryce and his guests last week, Deanna and AJ. Keith for filling in with me as I got to do a little strategic planning. A few of you came up to me afterwards and said, gee, that was the best webinar out of all 20 of them so far, and I tended to agree. So big thanks to Keith, great job. Got to hear probably the last 3/4 of the webinar and really picked up some good insights from the lenders and from Keith, and we'll spread those out a little bit today as we go a little further in some of the things to talk about today. A lot to talk about. We had some PPP guidance issued yesterday by SBA, and we'll be able to dive into that. A lot going on with stimulus, so let's kind of get rolling here. So as you're probably pretty much aware of, we're part of the 1,000 centers across the country for the from the SBDC program. Our group that leads us there is the Association of Small Business Development Centers in all 50 states. And as you realize, we're part of the Central California region, going from the farther northern reach of the San Joaquin Valley, southern San Joaquin, state of Nevada, into the Pacific Ocean, the central swath of California. We have 6 centers that provide services and provide a lot of consulting and training services you're well aware of. So we thank our sponsors, our very many sponsors, ranging, let's read them today: Kern County, the Mid-State Development, the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, our CSUB School of Business and Public Administration, the Blue Tick Valley program going out of Fresno State, and also SBA. So thank you all. We couldn't be here without you and appreciate your support for our webinar series over time. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we got quite a few things to talk about today, and some of those are going to be Congress and the next stimulus. So we'll have this next stimulus version coming up, along with potentially anyway where we stand right now. Also some discussion about the PPP2 and who knows, maybe a PPP3. Got some guidance, got some PPP EIDL updates, and of course, as always, some time for your questions and a poll. So a good sized poll today. So let's bring on that poll and see what we got for you today. Poll question number 1. And this is kind of along the lines of our PPP forgiveness today. And we're going to launch this first poll question, and it's regarding the amount of my PPP loan that will likely not be forgiven. It's going to be the amount of my EIDL advance, because we all know that that's not forgiven. My EIDL advance and some PPP other expenditures, lots of PPP, and last one is none. So again, the amount of your PPP loan that is likely not to be forgiven. And options: EIDL advance and some PPP, lots of PPP and none. And we're split kind of like right around both ends of this thing today. Dominating, as a matter of fact. A lot of forgiveness going on out there. So we're going to give you just a couple of more seconds to vote. We have about 40% of you in right now. Great sample size. And we're going to end this particular poll and share the results with you. And look at that, full forgiveness. Boy. Full forgiveness, 53%. We have 39% of you that have received the EIDL, and they're going to have that amount. I've talked to some people who are going to pay off the EIDL at the time of forgiveness and not carry over a note. But that's an option that's open to some people and not open to others. Also, we had 5% of you, your EIDL and some PPP, and 3% lots of PPP. So thank you for that first poll question. Let's go up and check out some of the other polls that we have here. And our second poll question is going to be only for Kern County residents. So for Kern County residents, we're going to ask if you've applied or received the following Kern Recovers program. So Kern County residents, have you received a Kern Recovers loan? Have you received any of the Kern PPP? Did you receive both the loan and the PPP or neither? So jump on in, get your votes in. We're starting to, as we expected, we figured that neither of you received the PPP or the loan, since a lot of you are on this call because of the PPP forgiveness, and that wasn't an option at first, but we're starting to see some of the Recovers PPP, or some of the Kern Recovers PPE, and a few of you have accessed both. Give you another second or two. We've got about nearly 40% of you in again, and over 40%. So let's end the poll, and there we go, sharing the results right there. 2/3 of you have neither the PPE or the loan program, which tells us 1/3 of you have accessed the programs, which is a good amount. We have 18% of you that have actually accessed the PPE program, the free PPE. We have nearly 10% of you with both the loan and PPE, and about the same number for Kern Recovers. So thank you for that information. It's good to know. And it's that time finally, I haven't done a whimsical type question for a while. So football's about ready to start up, isn't it? So with football starting up, and who knows, that's seeing the troubles with Major League Baseball. Our football question is going to be the last city to have multiple hometown NFL quarterbacks start in the same week were from what California town? San Mateo, California. Okay, we know Tom Brady. Chico, yeah, Chico. Bakersfield, we know Bakersfield. Los Angeles and Groveland, California. Oh, our wild horse, well, dark horse, Groveland, California. Are you kidding? So we have about 20% of you that have voted. Again, the last city to have multiple hometown NFL quarterbacks start in the same weekend: San Mateo, Chico, Bakersfield, Los Angeles, or Groveland. Okay, we have almost 45% of you in. Get a couple more minutes to get in and to make that last second guess. And let's close the poll. 50% of you are in. Let's close it right now and share the results for you. And the results, 41% of you say Bakersfield, 29% say Los Angeles, 14% San Mateo, 8% say Chico, California, and 8% Groveland, California, the northern gateway into Yosemite National Park. And of course, it's Bakersfield, California. Bakersfield with a couple starting quarterbacks, namely Derek Carr and Matt Barkley. And who knows, maybe another one soon, as we have had a recent Jordan Love drafted by the Green Bay Packers in the first round. So maybe another starting quarterback soon coming from Bakersfield. Okay, take that, Los Angeles. So that's it for our polls today. Thanks for participating. And let's go. So let's start with stimulus. And this is a slide that we presented and showed back a couple of weeks ago when we were first starting to talk about the first possibility for a stimulus package. And we discussed certain things, and this was 2 or 3 weeks ago. We said the timeline would be questionable and that there would be some differences in this package. And we didn't anticipate a deal until what is upcoming on the 7th, which is Friday, which is the scheduled last day before recess. And let's see, it was going to be kind of contentious, and there was a big difference. So those were the things that we came up with that were probably about ready to. So where do we stand now? Well, Let's start with some of the things that only Congress can do for small business stimulus. So you remember the CARES Act and how vital it was for so many of you with the PPP and a great significant increase in EIDL that we'll talk about a little bit later. But Congress is the only ones that can do a lot of the small business stimulus that we are really looking at as a small business community. And there are a number of areas to where many of us would like to see such. First of all, we have talked about the blanket PPP forgiveness. The blanket PPP forgiveness is a suggestion by Secretary Mnuchin about offering a blanket PPP forgiveness for loans under $150,000. You know, Congress is the only ones that can fix what we're referring to now as the $120 billion tax mess. And that is the fact that even though you have tax-free income in the forgivable nature of your PPP, the expenses are not deductible. And so we're going to run into some issues there. Many of you are actually hoping that, such as us, that there's a PPP too. And there have been some really encouraging aspects that have come out and a lot of support for PPP2. So that's looking like it's something that's a realistic endeavor. And it's really something that's not going to really cost Congress too much as they look to spend between $1 and $3 trillion on this particular package, with about $100 billion of PPP left over. And they're anticipating spending maybe 180 billion. It's one of the cheaper things on the ticket out there. I think Keith mentioned this last week, but there is potentially coming down the pipe a program that is going to be a modified, I'm calling it the modified pandemic version of the SBA 7A loan. And the SBA 7A loan is kind of the bellwether program, the guaranteed loan for SBA. They're catch-all. You get into the 504 loan program from SBA for real estate and contact Mid-State Development for that. But that's kind of the 7A program is the catch-all for everything that's not fixed asset based. So let's chat about that for a bit. And then also the relief options for underserved markets. And really there were some startling stories that came out last week about how immigrant-owned businesses were significantly impacted by not getting really, quite frankly, their fair share of the PPP and EIDL pie. And there's a variety of reasons. For example, looking at an article last week in the Wall Street Journal that discussed that Latino business owners represent 10% of all business owners in the United States. And only about 29% of those were able to get assistance from the government, a PPP or EIDL loan, which is in contrast to nearly 80% of small businesses across the country. So as you can see that there is really a lot of work to be done in some of these smaller immigrant-based communities, and also some of the areas such as in the Black community that's suffering greatly through the pandemic. And so hopefully, and at least in my belief, that there should be and hopefully is some relief options for underserved markets and potentially even including rural areas where they have less lending options. So we talked about the first bullet there was the blanket forgiveness, and we hit this a couple of weeks ago, but just real quick coverage of this again is that, you know, the nice thing about this potential blanket forgiveness is that for Congress, it basically makes 86% of the PPPs go away. Banks love it. 86% can go away, whereas it only affects about 25% of the revenue. So just a portion of the revenue, but a large number of the loans that would actually be forgiven. And you see the wait times that are potentially, and I put this up here because when we get into some of the new guidance, and I'll just throw this out there, some of the new guidance is you have 10 months after your PPP to apply for and receive forgiveness. And that could be in part because of these 60 and 90-day intervals. We'll see. So, and again, like we discussed a few weeks ago, the EIDL advance could be the problem. because $20 billion of EIDL advance actually is out now, and that program is closed. And that amount was not anticipated to be forgiven if you received a PPP. Now, some of that went for grants for individuals that did not receive a PPP, and they will not. Then that part is a grant and is already forgiven. So that could be the fly in the ointment as far as EIDL forgiveness. As far as the taxability issue that we covered many weeks ago, but have kind of forgot about it. But now is the time where it can be fixed if it's going to be fixed. And remember, your income is tax-free. So that's the great news. The great news is that it is still tax-free income that does not need to be included in your tax return for next year. The total aggregate amount of the taxes that, by not being able to deduct the PPP expenses that you pay out as part of your forgiveness grant, is 120 billion across the country for the entire program. And frankly, everything I've read is lawmakers are struggling on how to fix this. The Treasury has sided with the IRS on non-taxability of both issues, and unless it shows up as a fix in this particular stimulus, I don't see a lot of excitement to get it done with a standalone bill. So what will that do is that'll create some interesting and some difficult tax accounting differences for book and tax differences. You know, similarly, usually you'll have some of those, some of them have in the business, but now it's going down to every business that receives forgiveness is going to have some form of book or tax differences where the income, even though it is non-taxable, will need to be accounted for as some form of other income, I would guess. And the differences for the expenditures, which are not going to be tax deductible, create a rather expensive and confusing environment for wrapping all these numbers up when we're done. So hopefully we can get somebody who knows much more about the accounting side of this and how that affects everybody. But if you're going to see relief, you're going to see it potentially in the next few days, at least is what we forecast. So a second stimulus, the second PPP. And this looks like it is really about going to happen. There seems to be bipartisan support from members of both parties in the Senate Small Business Committee. The funding would be for about $190 billion. Now, remember, first round of PPP was for $360 billion. And then another 310 billion was added on for a total of 670. So this would be significantly smaller. One of the things that they're sticking with is that businesses will have to document a 50% reduction in revenue to be able to apply. And I'm sure there'll be a host of other rules that come in also, but that seems to be the big one right now, is having that 50% reduction in revenue. And of course, all the interesting questions that it'll bring. For example, if you started your business in, say, August of last year and you don't have a full year worth of results, just getting those in right now. So, it's going to be interesting on who will receive the PPP. It's obviously going to be very targeted, and it's going to be very focused. It could be industry focused. It could be NAICS code. But one of the things is, if this happens, is I think businesses that are right on that borderline really need to look into their potential sales situation. If you don't know how much your sales have dropped off since the pandemic hit, and generally the date that has been used is February 15th. So potentially we might have a new day on that, but a lot of businesses that first month and through, say March 15th, the sales were not sufficiently or significantly impacted. So one of the things you might want to do is just kind of look at, if you are interested in that, to see which direction that might be able to go for you. Okay, there's also discussion that kind of has come out of the Senate Small Business Committee, not the Finance, but and that's funding a new version of the 7A loan. Okay, I called it the pandemic version, the modified pandemic version. I don't know what it'll be called if it happens. It's not a slam dunk. It has less bipartisan support, at least in the press at this time, than PPP2. The $100 billion program, I think I missed the aspects in the discussion that Keith had on this last week, and I think it's the same program. But they're still looking at about $100 billion, and to use it under the existing SBA 7A loan guidelines. But what it would do is that it would extend long-term, low interest rate funding. One of the nice aspects is it's going to target seasonal businesses. We haven't heard a lot come out in a lot of the rules and a lot of the guidance on seasonal businesses, but this is one that clearly is going to be targeted to those businesses that have had their seasons wiped out. So really targeting those seasonal businesses that really pretty much lost an entire year's worth of revenue and opportunity. It's going to also target potentially small businesses in opportunity zones and other low-income census tracts. It seems like it's going to need that in order to get both party support. And again, if you're not familiar with opportunity zones, go to our YouTube page, CSUB SBDC YouTube, and we did a webinar on opportunity zones in February. And opportunity zones, we feel, is a great opportunity and a great a vehicle. They're generally lower income census tracts, opportunity zones that have significant benefits for investment in businesses and in land and building in those particular zones. And also, since we mentioned a little earlier about the recovery appears to be uneven for a number of minority and Hispanic small businesses, that some of this fund can be targeted to them, along with some of the CDFIs, the Community Development Financial institutions that work out of Treasury and are nonprofit lenders that make loans that are sometimes easier for all of us to get, not just minorities or Hispanics. So that's it on a little bit of stimulus that we have. It's going to be an interesting couple of days, and hopefully a couple of days. Hopefully it doesn't extend into the weekend into next week. As far as the last thing I can say about stimulus is that a lot of things are pretty much decided on. You're going to have your stimulus check coming again, pretty similar to the one that you got last time if you received one. It seems like there's still a lot of negotiations going around the unemployment insurance angle and what premium to pay on a federal basis for those receiving state unemployment insurance. So there's just going to be a lot of discussion and a lot of debate coming down and negotiations as they come down to the wire. So we have our Kern Recovers program and EIDL and PPP update next. And the Kern Recovers program the loan program has ended. Last Tuesday, the Kern County Board of Supervisors earmarked an additional $5 million into the program to make it a total of $30 million. And let's look at that program now and kind of see exactly the direction of where it kind of ended up. And so here's the Kern County Small Business Program. On the left side, it'll populate with dots the locations where the loans were spent. You see kind of the statistics for it. I only missed it a little bit. I'm out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, somewhere off of Puerto Vallarta. One could only wish I was out there, but so my map is a little bit in Mexico. So, but really the statistics on the right side is what I really wanted to share with you. And you do see that it was totally spent out at $30 million. And actually it came to the benefit and the relief of about 940 businesses. The average size of the loan was right around $30,000. From inception to fund was less than 20 days. And there were a total of 255 industries supported by those 940 loans. And you see kind of the vast majority were full service restaurants and limited service restaurants. So those were individuals that initially, most likely, a lot of those did not initially receive a PPP. maybe for reasons that we got into a little bit earlier. Um, and then you see a number of other places: fitness, recreation, drinking, healthcare, nail salons, beauty salons, some really impacted business associations. Yes, they were impacted too. And offices of dentists, so more healthcare. So a lot of good out of the $30 million, depending on, since this came from the original CARES Act and was earmarked to be spent in kind of a quick fashion, I believe before the end of the year or even sooner than that. There could be some possibility that some other funds are made available later on, since there are CARES Act funds, but right now they're being held in contingent for healthcare needs affected by COVID-19 and the surge we've experienced in the last probably 6 or 8 weeks or so. So that's a little bit about the Kern Recovers and how the program ended up. Really a really solid program for the community, and glad it happened, and hopefully we'll have some more resources there again. So then let's move on to Kern Recovers, the PPE program. So likewise, and gee, my dots are all in the right place, and my map is headquartered over Bakersfield this time. Amazing. Amazing I could pull that off. So you'll see here some of the statistics for the PPE distribution. Of course, the program that actually gets masks, sanitizers, gloves, and wipes out to businesses. So far, they've served 721 businesses, small businesses, 200 employees and under. There's still plenty of time to get in this program, although it is earmarked to end at the end of August. So if you need some personal protection equipment, if you need masks, sanitizers, gloves, and wipes in your business, this is still a great time. In order to fill out the form, go to the Kern County website. You see it at the top, kerncounty.com, and Kern Recovers, and go to the PPE section, fill out a form, fill it out, look at the rules, the regulations to comply, and you'll see the number of pickup locations, about 10 of them that are right there, anywhere from around Bakersfield to Delano, Lamont, Wasco, the Kern River Valley, and other locations. So throughout Kern County, you can get access to this PPE. Please get it in your business and stay safe. So we'll stop sharing that and go back to our PowerPoint. And let's move on to EIDL. So EIDL, as you know, is still open. It's open until 12/31. Got some EIDL stats finally that we can share with you. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Again, the EIDL approvals have been swift for those that have got in after 6/15. And really, if you haven't heard, if you have, and we still get calls from people that say they applied early on the process, something has happened. And we're still recommend people to attend the Fresno District Office of the SBA for their EIDL reconsideration webinar that they do Thursdays at 11 a.m. You can go Google if you have problems. I know sometimes it's a little difficult to find. I have problems finding it myself. But Fresno District Office of the SBA, and you can find it there, or we can gladly provide you a link to get there. So they're swift. PPP is open another 3 days, but in all, I believe if you haven't already got it at the bank and your bank isn't forwarding it by Friday, if it's not at the bank now, it's really pretty much all over with. So it had been showing demand up until the last minute. And as we're speculating, there's going to be potentially a PPP 2 in the next stimulus. So let's go a little evolution of this EIDL process. So we have SBA disaster that was declared for most of California on March 16th. It actually, if you've heard me say this before, I was trying to find the exact date, but actually Kern was probably about in a group of 6 counties that received the SBA declaration before the entire state. And I'm assuming, my guess is that is right around March, maybe March 12th. The earliest applications we saw submitted were on March 18th. If you submitted back then, you submitted that real bulky upload, personal financial, the real heavy statement, a lot of attachments, tax returns, and everything else that went up with it. That was the early process until the CARES Act was passed on the 27th of March, which opened up an easier process, which was the portal, which was only a 3-page portal. The process allowed the CARES Act's legislation, allowed some fundamental changes to the SBA disaster lending programs, and particularly this one, since this was clearly an economic injury disaster loan disaster, unlike most are for more bigger damages. So we started the portal on the 30th. The portal was closed later, then reopened, and EIDL advances closed late in July. So that's kind of our evolution. And then where we are now with EIDL, the total funds that SBA made available, or actually Congress made available through the CARES Act, was $374 billion, of which as of July 22nd, only $160 billion has been spent. So that is really, that's really an interesting number, because most people, although, there are some strategies for individuals that might have been turned down. Your EIDL application can go in till the 31st of December. For example, if you were turned down for some reason that can be reversed, say, for example, you had a credit issue or two and that you were able to go in and fix between now and December 31st, there's a very good possibility you might be able to turn that decline into actually loan approval. So, but with $214 billion, it really leaves, open a lot of things we like to do, and that's speculate. Is there a possibility, since those early EIDL maximum loans were for $500,000, is it now possible? Is it possible that we could actually see an increase for some businesses in the $150,000 maximum that has been issued for much of the program? So that is something that we can speculate on as we move on around down the road. Also, SBA EIDL disaster loans, there have been 2.8 million of them issued. So, and of the EIDL advances and grants, we see that 5.7 million were made. So of the EIDL, it really shows you where a lot of the EIDL grants really got down to, because I believe that number dropped significantly as time went on. So if we had 20, and that is correct, that's 5.7 million loans made for a total of $20 billion, which suggests that the grant size was under $4,000, the EIDL loan and EIDL advances. So that's suggesting that there were a lot of the 1,000 and 2,000 and 3,000 EIDL grants that were made, probably to those that were unable to receive a PPP that are not going to be repaid, or it's just to individuals that had, between 1 and 5 employees, to bring that down so significantly. And of course, the amount that we saw was totally $20 billion and closed when it hit that amount. Okay, we got a lot to talk about on forgiveness, and we did get that yesterday. So let's just reiterate a couple quick points and jump into the bullets of a very extensive 10-page FAQ that SBA offered yesterday. And with that, when we get into this, we will get into the highlights, and I mean truly the highlights, because we will have the document that was sent out highlighted, and next week we will probably be getting into the detail into the spreadsheet and show how these actually play. And I just want to warn you, there's a lot of questions that have been answered that we needed for future guidance on. We're going to probably still say we're going to need a little bit more guidance to get through everything. A lot of the stuff we'll go over has been already, I think we've already determined or figured that out, but there are some other key pieces of guidance in the forgiveness process. But just real quick, the latest, the SBA is planning on opening portals to the lenders on August 10th, and really some really great information from AJ from Mission Bank and Deanna from Valley Strong Credit Union last week on actually the processes that their individual institutions are going to implement in order for the forgiveness process. I think one thing you'll see with some of the guidance that we go over is SBA is clearly anticipating a largely digital presence on the application process for forgiveness. And I think we heard that last week with Mission Bank, for example. So some great guidance, and I hope we have some more lenders on in the upcoming future. And it will be next week's poll question is, even though I figured it out, it's going to have to be probably 10 answers strong on where you got your PPP. So hopefully we can get lenders in here and provide the greatest value to you on your process as you move forward. So they can actually bunch one or many in there. And of course, you know, if blanket forgiveness happens on loans under 150, even though things have been very quiet on that front, that will eliminate much of the process for the smaller, somewhat smaller loan applicants. So there we go on forgiveness. Cash flow. Love cash flow. Generally a positive cash flow, but let's stop the screen and let's share and go into the actual guidance that we've received to go over this week. And of course, it wants to cooperate. Just not right now. Okay, here we go. So, as promised, highlighted versions of the PDF put out by the Treasury for PPP FAQs. And so officially this starts our question and answer series for today because, and I can actually promise you that these answers are most likely about 100% right. I can't always give you that guarantee. So they tell you can rely on this document for the SBA's interpretation. And let's get into it right away. So the first question has to do with the forgiveness application. Should sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed with no, which form do they fill out? Well, it's pretty easy. It's the 3504EZ. And we also, through last week, and we might look at this again because when we did the analysis a few weeks ago in the spreadsheet and pulled up the loan applications, we saw many others, even though they weren't, and they were maybe your larger sole props and others. So maybe that's the distinction there. Sometimes when we think of sole props, we think of them being the only self-employed individual in that business. So, so that's the first question. I like it when they start with an easy one. And the next one had to do with, can PPP lenders use scanned copies of documents and e-signatures? And the answer is yes. So really kind of opens the door for a lot of digital transmission of the documents that is going to be rather extensive between the receipts and other things, payroll reports and other types of things. But scanned copies are going to be allowed. Uploading the scanned copies, it remains to be seen if it's going to be in some kind of zip file or exactly how that'll be. But I hope you have a good scanner, because if you go through the PPP forgiveness process here, you're going to probably need it. If you haven't learned about digital signatures, this is good. This is a good process to go through then, because that'll be helpful for you. This question has to do with submitting a timely loan forgiveness applications. Does the borrower have to make payments on the loan prior to SBA remitting? Well, maybe this is why I asked that question on how much you would have left. Most of you, many of you are not going to have to pay anything, and another significant amount are going to have just the EIDL advance. So, you know, it says as long as you submit your loan application within 10 months of the completed covered period. And they go on to define the covered period, and the covered period and the alternative covered periods will come up in more of our FAQs here. But really, the the 10-month period really kind of tells you the length that if this whole thing kind of goes through the process, the time that it could really take. And I hope that we can all get this through in the timeline that we want. So down below as part of the answer, it also says a portion of the loan is forgiven, or if the forgiveness application is denied, any remaining balance on the loan must be repaid by the borrower before the maturity date. And recall the maturity date is a 2-year loan if you received it before June 5th. And during the forgiveness process, your lender does not alter it up to 5 years, which was the term of the loan for PPPs made after June 5th. The key part of why I think I really went through the exercise of highlighting this is because interest accrues during the time between the disbursement of the loan and the SBA remittance of the forgiveness amount. And we'll try to cover that in an example next week. The next set of questions have to do with payroll cost. And I think that they did a really good job of answering a lot of payroll questions that we've had come up. And I think we have some serious answers here that we didn't have before. So let's start with this one. Payroll cost incurred during the covered period or alternative covered period, but paid outside of that. Are they eligible for forgiveness? And I think we've identified this as a yes before. And they give a couple of really nice examples about how both before and after. Remember, the alternative payroll covered period was kind of an accommodation that came out of the National Association for CPAs. Maybe not the correct title, but that's what they are. And what they did was they wanted to align your payroll periods with the alternative covered period. So being able to incur the payroll or part of it outside of your actual window of your covered period kind of allows that to happen with that. Now, what we'll find in a little bit is you have the covered period and the alternative covered period for payroll taxes, but not, or excuse me, payroll expenses, but not for other expenses such as rent, etc. So it was an accommodation to align the payroll period with your actual payroll period. So moving right along, and please put your questions today when you have them, when we're done with these, in the Q&A box. I will go to the Q&A box. If time, we'll hit the chat box, but we'll go to the Q&A, and remember to please keep them short. You have a better chance of getting them answered with my, I like to call it my mail pattern ADD. So question 3, are borrowers required to calculate payroll costs for partial periods? So, and there's your answer. And if you use a bi-weekly or less frequent, you can use the elect the alternative payroll period. We kind of just discussed this, got a little bit ahead of that question for you. But really kind of gives you the option to do that either using an 8-week period or the 24-week period. Question 4 on the payroll was for purposes of calculating cash compensation. Should borrowers use the gross amount before deductions? And the correct answer is yes, use that gross amount before deductions. So when you've paid employees, you're going to use the gross amount. And are salaries or wages covered by loan forgiveness? And this is one that we've been waiting for guidance on, because the SBA has identified this, that payroll costs can include all forms of cash compensation, including tips, commissions, bonuses, and hazardous pay. It is still limited to the $100,000 on an annualized basis, however. So that's something to remember, and it's something that tips and commissions, bonuses are still limited also on your per employee wage limit as an owner of $20,833 and $46,000 also for employees. Question 6 has to do with group health insurances and the benefits that they have. And the key thing that came out of the group health coverage was a couple of things from my perspective. One is there was some consideration and some debate on if the group coverage needed to be in place before February 15th. There is nothing here that states that. It just talks about the group health benefits, and it also warns borrowers that not to include the employer's share of your healthcare premium. So if you have a copay system for your employees, and let's say your health insurance is $10,000 and your employees contributed $1,500 of that, you're only going to be given the $8,500 that you pay for that. And then they wanted to spell that out and make that clear here. And then also down below in retirement benefits, which is question number 7. So it's essentially the same thing if you have a more specific question, but it's if you have some type of a 401k where you have an employer shared contribution share, that of course is not going to be covered under the cost and the forgiveness. So moving on to question 8. A popular question over the last 20 weeks for sure has been the amount of owner compensation and what is eligible for forgiveness. So we determined that it's $20,833 per individual, and that's per individual in total across all businesses in which he or she has an ownership stake. So, that one kind of snuck up on me. I think we've read that before, but so if you have 2 or 3 different businesses and are fortunate enough to be compensated in excess of $100,000 in each of those businesses, then this is essentially telling me that if I have ownership in those 3 businesses, that the payroll compensation is capped at the $20,833 per individual in total across all businesses. So that's something that kind of was a little item that maybe snuck up on me, maybe not you. And remember that $20,833 is for the 24-week period, and you have to elect the 24-week covered period in order to take that amount. And that is if your loan was before June 5th. If you use the 8-week covered period, your cap is $15,385. So we do have quite a few individuals that are looking at the 8-week covered period because, quite frankly, they spent their payroll in that particular time. But remember, that is going to be capped at $15,385. So some of the guidance also provided information to C corporations, specifically on the type of entity that you have, and this one is for C corporations. And let's see what I thought was important to highlight. I learned back when I was in college and I'd grab my textbook and my yellow highlighter that oftentimes I missed the good point, Again, I'll blame that on my EDD, but I think I got these right. So maybe not. So in this particular C corporation example, what you do is you use, and this gets down to some of the fringe benefits that you can include. And this is some particularly valuable guidance, I believe. So whereas we talked about the compensation, also for health insurance and for employer retirement contributions, it's going to be capped on basically your 2019 employer retirement contribution. And you're able to actually pull in 2.5 divided by 12. So same calculation, basically. Just because it's an easy number to remember, let's say your retirement employer contribution was $100,000, that will cap down to that $20,833 if you use the 24-week period, the same thing the compensation would. So some guidance, some very valuable guidance here on the retirement plan and the health plan, health insurance for C Corp. On S Corp, it's going to be a little bit different. And it's going to be a little bit different, and it's really kind of coming down to a 2% stake. Um, I think that's a really valuable last sentence highlighted where it says employer contributions for health insurance are not eligible for additional forgiveness for S corporation employees with at least a 2% stake in the business. And this is something we're going to see also come on down. So there's some variations in the form of entity on how some of these fringe benefits are treated for forgiveness. And this is something when we have more time next week, we'll likely get into. Also, self-employed individuals that file a Schedule C, if you're a Schedule C filer, a couple things you need to, one thing that's really, I think, important is that your Schedule C must be included in forgiveness, in the forgiveness application. Sometimes I believe a lot of these deals, because you did not have to have your Schedule C completed and filed for 2019. Let me go back on that. You need to have it completed. It did not have to be filed with the taxing authority. So apparently, from what I read out of this, is they're going to want to match up. If the borrower did not submit your 19 to the lender when you applied, it must be included with the forgiveness application. So since the tax deadline has come and gone, they're going to want that. If you haven't had your taxes done and you're a Schedule C or Schedule F for farms, you'll need to take care of that. The other thing that's kind of interesting here with self-employed individuals is that separate payment for health insurance, retirement, and taxes are not eligible for additional forgiveness. SBA in their guidance concluded that the health insurance and retirement expenses are paid out of your self-employment income, which is kind of what happens through that particular process, and they carried it forward. General partners. General partners, you'll see some of the forgiveness here is, again, the key thing on general partners that I keep coming back to is that since you're filing Form 1065 Schedule K1 on box 14K that can be reduced, you generally have to multiply that by the 0.9235, which is the Social Security provisions, Social Security and Medicare provision for 7.65%. And the separate payments for health insurance retirement are not eligible for additional forgiveness for general partners. And there's our thing for LLC owners. Apparently, somehow you got skipped as far as the highlighting. So we'll go from there. So let's talk about some of the non-payroll cost FAQs that are coming out. So some of the loan forgiveness non-payroll, start with question 1, and I kind of covered this a while ago. Non-payroll cost incurred prior to the cover period but paid for loan forgiveness? Yes. The eligible costs for mortgage interest and rent, lease, and other payments are eligible. And their example is the electricity bill. And the thing, the SPA used the same covered period I used from April 20th to October 4th. I found that fascinating. If you read on, you'll see that the bill was for April. It could have been for the entire month of April, yet our covered period was from April 20th. And remember, covered period, again, is not alternative covered period. For non-payroll costs, the covered period is what you have to go by. But they do give you a great deal of flexibility coming back to the incurred for the entire month, and you don't have to really allocate it on your utility statement, which is real helpful. Some of the other things that came up that were kind of interesting, or maybe even fascinating for forgiveness, kind of had to do with being paid outside of they were incurred during the covered period, but paid. So when we've been saying paid and incurred, it works both ways. So it can be incurred during the covered period, and then all of a sudden it ends, but your bill doesn't come and you pay it later. And that is open for forgiveness as well. Okay. Oops, went a little too far there, didn't I? Backing it on up a little bit. Question 3. If the borrower elects to use the alternative payroll for payroll, does the alternative payroll period apply to non-payroll cost? For the third time today, the answer is no. If anybody asks me that question, when we get to questions, I'm not going to answer it. Third time, no, you cannot use the alternative payroll covered period. You have to use the covered period of when you received your loan, moving it up either for the 8 or 24-week period. Number 4, is interest on unsecured credit eligible for loan forgiveness? And the answer is no. So as far as interest on business mortgage property or personal property, such as an auto loan that is secured by the lender, that is eligible. But if you have something that is unsecured credit, and unsecured credit, let's say a credit card, is not going to be eligible according to the definitions and the interpretations issued by SBA and Treasury. So anything that's unsecured, and it could be any debt. So think of it as, is it being liened? Is it being liened in one way, shape, or form? Some of that could be even coming down to if many of you that received an EIDL, you actually had a UCC1 filing by the SBA in probably a very subordinated position. If you had 2 or 3 loans on your property and SBA slid into the 4th position with a UCC1, which isn't a real secure position, obviously, but that would open up the question, if that was an asset that was secured by an EIDL, is that technically secure? I shouldn't have even opened that can of worms. Question 5. If you've recently renegotiated, renewed a lease, or refinanced a loan, you'll find that yes, if it existed prior to February 15th, that's okay. So if you had a lease that, and the example is really good because you had a lease back from 2015, it renewed in March of 2020. Technically, it's outside of the February 15th window. And you're able to do that. Now, with a new lease, I do not believe that's going to be covered. But yes, if you had an existing lease that was either renegotiated, potentially, or even redone. So question number 6 has to do with covered utility payments. And this was bringing us a lot of grief over time. And I think we have some answers here. And it was the word transportation under the CARES Act. And really for the definition, we started thinking, well, gee, transportation, that could be gas, it could be about anything. And for our particular example is what expenses does this category include? And it's only for the distribution of transportation for, say, like a utility. So your utility bill, your electric bill, could come with a fee assessed by the state. It could come back with a separately distribution charge or other things. And so the word transportation kind of got a lot of us confused about what could or could not be taking and be eligible for forgiveness as a utility payment, where now it looks to be going back to the fixed utilities at a particular institution or business. Okay, so some of the last FAQs coming up, a couple more pages of these. Has to do with, of course, something I probably should have jumped at the beginning. But it has to do with full-time equivalents in that particular mess. And the first one really kind of covers what we've already talked about as far as laid off employees, but they declined to come back. So that was our first question. And of course, you needed the written documentation in order to bring that back. You needed a written offer of rejection, and you needed some form of written record that efforts to hire similar qualified employees were unavailable. So if you hire somebody back and somebody left, that is considered a wash. And really, it looks like you do not get credit for that particular individual here. And of course, also, because they're not busy enough already, you do have a requirement where you need to inform the state unemployment office of any employee's rejected rehire offer within 30 days of that rejection. And since some people still don't have their unemployment, I just don't know how that's possible. Hopefully some of you have done it and you can explain it to me. The next question is for seasonal employers. So it's FTEs on seasonal employers, and it's using a 12-week period. And if you elect to use the 12-week period from May 1 to September 30th to calculate your PPP loan amount, what period should be used as the reference period for calculating any reductions in loan forgiveness? So essentially, SBA came out and said that if for a seasonal employer, you must use the same 12-week period as you used for calculating your PPP amount, as you'll calculate for loan forgiveness. And I believe that is the number of employees being carried forward. And again, we'll get into this detail a lot more after we've had a chance to kind of digest and try to put it in a workable format. And so there will be a PPP 22 by the numbers next week. Next question, calculating FTE reduction exceptions. Do you include borrowers or employees or owners who made more than 100,000? And the answer is yes. And then the last one, which is really a long question, is on reduction of an employee's pay. So it covers the amount of forgiveness a borrower will receive if they received less money. There's some excellent examples. If anybody wants the, if you can probably find this online fairly easily by now, either at the Treasury or SBA. It's the recent FAQs dated the 4th. So if you would like me to send it to you, I can send it to you. I could even send you my hacked up highlighted version. But it's 102. Let's get to some questions. Okay, so not a lot of questions in the question box today, but let's see what we have. Okay, and maybe some of these questions will probably come back to the beginning of the presentation, so they might have been answered beforehand. Can we use 100% of the payroll for, can we use our PPP for 100% payroll? Absolutely. Some people are telling me that this is the cleanest, easiest way, and cleanest, easiest way, and actually is potentially maybe easier for you when you go through the forgiveness process. So next question is, I have a PPP for 5,000. I have an EIDL for 2,000, but did not take an EIDL loan. Is this all forgiven or just the non-EIDL advance? And the answer, unfortunately, is the EIDL advance of 2,000 is not going to be forgiven. The 4,750 of PPP, if you come up and follow the guidelines, and the expenses can be forgiven. Okay, next question is, I have not taken any money as the owner of for personal pay, was waiting to the end of the year to make sure I had money to keep the business going. Is that okay to wait and take out later? And the business is a salon. That's a very interesting question, because in the past we have really kind of advocated for taking it on a regular or routine basis rather than all at once. But I see your point in wanting to defer and want to see if, rather than take the money yourself, if you have it. The one thing I would probably do if it was me, and again, I'm just telling you what I would do, is I would probably, if I was concerned about not having the money, is I would probably take it, and if I had to, inject it back in the business later. I would wait till I started taking my withdrawals, and given, you know, let's say it's $50,000, the amount that you have earmarked for yourself. So half of that maximum balance would be $10,417. Is I would take it over a regular period of time to show that you actually took that money at that time. Plus, that gives you more time to try to decide. But that's a really interesting question, and I might think about that one for next week. I have not made any income last year for 2019 in my business. Am I eligible for a PPP loan? Not the self-employment portion of it, because it's based on income replacement for which you are replacing. For the employees that you had, it's to replace their wages and bring them back to work and have them positioned to be in place when the pandemic subsides. But for the self-employment portion, it's to replace any income. And if you didn't make any, then they have deemed it not actually being available. If you would like a copy of today's event, just send me a quick email, kbearden@csub.edu. Okay, so will the term for repayment of the EIDL be extended beyond 12 months? Okay, now the EIDL, repaying the EIDL, you will have significantly longer than that. You'll have 30 years if it's the EIDL. The PPP is at the discretion of your lender. So most likely you received a PPP prior to June 5th, which was the 2-year term. Now, it's been a while since we've talked about this, but that's something I'll have for you next week. If it actually takes 10 months to go through the entire forgiveness process, I see your point. Then you would only have about a year in order to pay that. And I believe through that entire process, you're not making any payments, but it is a 2-year note. So let me look into that. But right now, I would say that if it takes you 10 months, you're going to have 14 years unless your lender extends it from 2 to 5 years. If it was after June 5th, then you do have a 5-year term in that note, which would be significantly larger and longer period of time for the PPP. We're getting a lot of requests for we're going to send out the bulk email on Thursday or Friday. I know they usually come on Friday. Getting a little older, a little slower. It's too much to do. But I try to get it out to you on Thursday. It just usually comes Friday. Friday, we'll send out the bulk email. You can open it if you want to. You can junk it if you want. And it's going to have the hacked up version and also the copy of the conference, today's conference. So a recording of today's webinar, and then also the rules and regulations. And those will probably be the only 2 items, but that'll make it easier for everyone. You won't have to send an email. Yes, marvelous. Inyo County does have PPE programs. Last I heard, they had PPE programs, and I would contact one of the chambers of commerce, either in the northern or southern part of the county, either in Lone Pine or Bishop. But last I heard, they did have it. I don't know how much the supply they had. If I know you guys have been busy on the Eastern Sierra, so but do check with our friends at the Bishop or Lone Pine Chambers of Commerce. Okay, if sole proprietor has an application, if sole proprietor filing Schedule C has an application in Kern Recovers and has not received funding due to the end of the program, can that individual apply for PPP on a federal level? If you have not received a PPP, then the answer would be most likely if you qualify. The only problem is that you're down to 3 days, and trying to find a lender who can get it through that quick, you're really going to have to jump on this and probably need to have something to a lender probably today or tomorrow. But really, your online lenders are going to probably be the best resource for you. You can also check with your Kern Recovers lender, because all of them did the PPP loans as well, and see if there's a chance, since unfortunately you did not receive a Kern Recovers loan, that maybe you can access a loan from the PPP. Utility bill in the first month of the loan period paid it. The bill was for 2.5 months. Ooh, that's a good question. Is it is it typical that your utility bills you every 2.5 months? I would say if it's typical and normal that they do it for 2.5 months, it's going to come down to your lender on what they say. So you have a utility bill that's 2.5 months that's in the that's actually in the incurred period beforehand and actually is part of the covered period. And we've said that yes, you can take that month before, but this would literally be 2.5 months. So I guess it would come down to the normal application of that, and then it's going to be the comfort level of your lender who actually is going to need to take that. So it's going to probably be your lender's call on that. You have received an EIDL loan. Can you still be forgiving on your PPP? The answer is yes. Yes, EIDLs and PPP can go hand in hand. You can have both. It's just the EIDL advance that actually gets basically turned into your PPP forgiveness process and through the paperwork there. Okay, on unemployment, what happens if you have an employee who has all 3 risk factors and does not come back? Document it. I would just document it. And, I think that that's the call of the employee and it's them to feel if it's safe. And again, if you have that documentation, I would believe that you will be able to come and you don't even have to notify the unemployment office in that case. Looks like we're getting through the questions. I received my PPP back in April, but I have not used it. Can I start now and still get it forgiven? Yes, you could use it now. You will need to elect the 24-week period, but you can start using it now and you can get forgiven if you follow the same guidelines that are kind of like we are all following. So yes, absolutely. Again, you're going to have 24 weeks though from April. So, gee, that's getting back there. And you might be able to move the payroll up a period or up a little bit of time given your length of payroll. But you need to go out 24 weeks from either the covered period or your alternative covered period, April to 24 weeks, and you could use it in that window. Okay, a couple more questions and then we're going to wrap it up. Received a PPP loan and I'm a sole proprietorship, no employees. Can I continue to pay myself owner's draw without withholding taxes? Yes, absolutely. And I think we went over as a sole proprietor, your taxes are kind of outside. You pay that with your income. So just using the example, since we've used it a lot today, of the $100,000 maximum, if you're in that bracket, then you can pay yourself up to the $10,833, and then actually the taxes would come out of that. You receive a 1099, sure, that's possible. Can I reject my EIDL loan because it was lower than I calculated? No, don't reject your EIDL loan, because if you reject your EIDL loan, you cannot, in most cases, unless it was changed after the CARES Act, go back and get that loan. What I would do is I would be on the webinar tomorrow, the SBA webinar, and for EIDL reconsideration, and say, is there a way that you can get reconsideration? Because, and again, you're saying gross income minus expenses. SBA calculates it, and I don't even know the SBA calculation, but it is based on your gross profit. So it's based on your revenues minus your cost of sales. Your gross profit is the determining factor. So you might want to talk to them. But if you reject your EIDL because it's too small, they will deem you as not needing it and you will not be able to access it later. So please, anybody, before you reject an EIDL, give it a lot of consideration, realizing that you cannot go back and apply for a larger or another amount later. If it's too small right now, we saw that there is a lot, 214 billion, I believe, left over, or at least right now outstanding in the EIDL program that runs through the end of the year. Okay, that's our questions. Hey, gee, we ran 14 minutes long. Boy, isn't that typical? So we're going to be back next week. We'll be back, and we'll be back with our cash flow example that I'm going to throw up every single week. And understanding cash flow, we'll be back for webinar number 22. Again, you probably see what we're going to be going through is a little bit more of the detail on the forgiveness. We'll go through some of the stimulus that happens. Hopefully there's a stimulus package by then, and hopefully includes what we want. So thank you for attending, and it's great having you on board again. And for myself, no guest speaker this week, for Kelly Bearden. Have a great day, and we'll be back next week. Bye-bye now.